Yeah, so my editing software deleted like the first half of this video, so I'm having to redo it, which is great. Love it. Normally I use these videos to talk about difficulty, but at this point everyone is going to have a different experience with these dungeons, and it's basically what you make of it. Some people will find what I find difficult easy, and some things I find easy other people will find difficult. So I'm still going to talk about difficulty. But before starting, there will be some spoilers for the new dungeons, so if you like to go into these blind, well, there you go. Starting off with dungeons though, I want to talk about Black Gem Foundry. Black Gem ends up in a weird spot as it was extremely hard for us in the sense that every fight in some way is a puzzle fight. Not a single mechanic in here requires that much out of the player. However, when you start combining them with the fact you have no idea what's going on, it can become very difficult very quickly. Also, me and my group share a single brain cell, so, you know, things just kind of progress slowly for us, so it's a thing. Starting off with the first boss, this just kind of comes down to space management. It's a really cool fight in the fact that he counters his own mechanics. It's not something we've basically ever seen, I don't think, but we do have some issues with this fight. My personal major issue with this fight is the imps. They are probably here to punish overburning, however they possess Zorn's heavy attack, and while this on its own isn't that bad, a imp can do enough damage with this to become very threatening very quickly. While the imps themselves are not random, they do kind of spawn randomly, and they can get lost very quickly depending on how fast you're doing the fight, as they will spawn, walk into the crystal maze thing that you've been building, and just start doing stuff. They don't do enough damage on their own to be threatening. However, with the fact the arena becomes more and more lethal as the fight goes on, the later imps can sometimes just seem unfairly balanced, and it's weird. The thing I want to talk about more though is what I like about this fight. This fight introduces a kind of funny mechanic as you get pulled and pushed towards and away from the center. This mechanic alone makes this fight one of my favorites in the game. You can completely control how hard the mechanic is and how challenging you want it to be. If you want an easier time, you can use the boss's mechanics to break some of the crystals. However, if you just don't care and you think you can live it, you can just not, and then you make a more challenging encounter for yourself. But if you can do it, it just makes the rest of the fight easier, though whether or not it's worth it, it's kind of just up to you. I really enjoy this fight, and I think it is actually one of the better fights that they've ever made. The imps could use a little bit of tuning as they can feel unfair, but everything else about this fight is really well done, and I like the fact that you can use the boss mechanics against him. On to the second boss. This is probably actually my favorite boss, however, it wouldn't be if I wasn't playing a tank. We'll get to that in a little bit, however, I want to give Zon some credit for something they've been doing pretty well recently. This boss, as you walk in, shows you its mechanics and teaches you them very quickly. If you pay attention to the animation he plays, he is telling you how to do his fight immediately. Past that though, this boss is basically your typical hits like a dump truck, but it doesn't actually. It's weird. The boss itself hits very, very hard. However, a tank can solo tank this pretty easily and actually out heal his main mechanic, which you would think wouldn't be possible for how hard he hits. As for the main mechanic itself, it's a lot more interesting and just kind of feels like a more refined Zon Beam. You can pick who it targets by being the furthest person away from him, and when you get targeted, it doesn't just hard stun you and lock you in place. Instead, the person with the beam actually has a use. They end up breaking the crystal atronachs that spawn. However, with the ways we've found to do the fight, you don't really have to do anything. It just ends up standing there and hitting the boss. As for the whole, if I wasn't tanking, I wouldn't feel the same way, this fight is a little weird on a DPS. If you have someone taking the beam, the other two DPS don't really do anything. Nothing targets them for the most part, and at the end of the day, you kind of just end up with a parse fight. I'm not saying parse fights are bad. However, the fact that this boss just doesn't really interact with two people on the team is just kind of sad. The main thing that they'll have to deal with is the immunity phases. They can be annoying and just there's not really much going on that a person has to deal with. You can dodge roll the firewalls, and with that just kind of loses all the challenge they pose. Along with this phase is over so quickly as the main enemy in this phase doesn't have all that much health. It's just, there's not much going on for these two DPS besides their normal job of hit thing, don't die. Overall though, this fight does pose some interesting challenges. It was fun to figure out. It was cool the first time we saw him melt the Atro with the laser. We didn't actually see the intro cutscene, and I don't actually think it existed week 1. It might have, I don't actually know. But when we figured that out, it was kind of interesting to see, oh, this super annoying mechanic is very easy, but it was cool to figure out. And finally, we have the boss that I think will wall people for a while. This fight will seem impossible for some people for a while. This is because it is just 100% a puzzle fight. There's nothing else to it. There is a puzzle, and if you don't figure it out, you lose. You could technically RNG your way through it, though you have to win a 25% roll 4 times in a row, which, no. Anyway, back to the mechanics. I love and hate this fight. Since it's a puzzle fight, once you figure out the puzzle, it becomes far easier. However, there are some problems. Some of the mechanics in this fight make the boss gain 90% damage resistance. Why she does this, and it's like random mechanics, I don't know. But it'd be nice if she just wouldn't do this. She already forces you to run away, because if you don't, you die. So you already can't really damage her. So why not, once, if you finish the mechanic early, let us get some extra damage in? I don't know. It just kind of seems backwards, as she's already forcing you to do something, and if you don't, you lose. So it's like, if you're able to do it faster, why not get rewarded for some free damage or something? Because she is just standing in the middle doing nothing. So, you know, it's just, it's an interesting thing, but it's overall a pretty fun fight. It loses something once you figure out the puzzle. Switching gears to the other dungeon that I will always mispronounce because of something we were doing, but Naj is a more normal dungeon compared to Black Gem. It's far more straightforward from what it asks the player, and the fights are less mechanically challenging. However, the damage output from most of these fights is quite a bit higher. I would personally say it's probably the harder of the two, just because of how spiky the damage can get and the fact that it can just fold a player almost instantly, and there's not a lot you can do about it. A lot of these fights, it's just like, if something goes wrong, someone is going to die. Let's see here. Starting off with the first boss, we have, oh yeah, this boss just sounds like a toddler that just learned how to speak, and speaks only from words it's ever heard from a supervillain from a show like SpongeBob or something. At a certain point, we just straight up turned off voice lines because, well, we were mainly memeing. It's not actually that bad, but oh my god. If you're hearing this over and over and over again, it just, yeah, something about this is just annoying. I think it's on purpose. It's probably on purpose, but oh my god, this boss I want to throw into a wall. Mechanically wise, this fight is interesting. Poxito hits harder than almost every trial boss in the game, it seems like. With some setups, I was being Y-attacked by this thing for 42k, which is admittedly our fault because we were trying something funny, but Poxito just is kind of like that. It hits super hard for almost no reason. So yeah, that's a thing. Along with Poxito just hitting super hard, Poxito has more than one way to try to instantly wipe your group, which is funny. When we were first doing the dungeon, one thing I noticed was how the ghosts that Poxito spawns seem to be desync to hell and back. You can dodge roll the second they got to you, and sometimes they would just go away and not do anything. Other times they would swing, you would dodge roll the swing, you would end your dodge roll, you would have nothing happen to you for a second, and then you get feared out of nowhere. It's just super awkward, and maybe you're not supposed to be able to dodge roll them, but just something weird is going on with them and they seem kind of off. This isn't really a complaint about the fight, as at the end of the day, you should just kill the ghost the second they spawn. They have no health, and realistically, they're the most threatening thing in the arena to anyone, as they hard CC you until you break free or trigger a trap, which they do some damage, but they're not terrible. Let's talk about the main mechanic. Poxito does in fact have an immunity phase. Hooray, the best mechanic ever made. Immunity phases, they're great. Best thing, LC wasn't ruined by them at all. No, but no, for real, Poxito's immunity mechanic is actually very good. You can completely control how long the immunity is by just holding Tuxedo on top of the saw blades, and it will never overstay a welcome. It's just there and it's either gone instantly, or if you're panicking, it will just continue to be immune and beat the crap out of you. This is something I am okay with, as being able to control immunity phases is a lot more interesting than some of the stuff in the past, which I want to make a video on, as some of the immunity phases Zoth been adding just seem to not make a lot of sense. This one though, yeah, no, this one's fine. Second boss is just first boss but in forward. Again, this boss does immunity well. The tank has full control on whether or not the boss goes immune, and its full immunity phase that is required can be sped up by players doing his mechanics well. So this is something I want to talk about, as it's something important to me. Immunity phases are sometimes very bad in this game. Orphic, for example, you can do his mirrors instantly, and you will switch the color of the room to the color he wants you to go to, and he'll not go unimmune. He will have to finish his animation, spawn the next set of mirrors, and you get nothing out of being good at switching the mirrors. He just sits there immune until you do it. It would be fine with me if you went unimmune as you switched the main mirrors and then went re-immune as the two new ones popped up, but you just have to sit there and wait for him until he finishes his animation that you just do not care about. Well, that rant's over now. Back to the regular actual fight. This fight just hurts. Overall, it's just a fun fight. There's a lot of damage coming out. Some of the mechanics come out super fast and can overwhelm. However, there's nothing that feels impossible. I will say one downside to this fight is the fire breath Tuxedo does is kind of nothing. If you don't block it, you instantly get killed. However, you don't need any sort of special block mitigation to get through it. You don't need anything special, really. It just kind of doesn't do a lot of damage. Oh boy, here we go. This is going to be a long one. The final boss has gotten to something that I have thought is lacking in ESO for the longest time now: spectacle. Before talking about the final boss, I want to look at some content from the past, going all the way back to Talaria. This is the last final boss I feel like hit the mark, as this is a final actual boss. Let me explain that really quick. We have things like Onzel, which is a cool fight, but it doesn't really hit that larger than life enemy. She's big, but nothing she does has the spectacle to Talaria just swinging swords around the entire arena, being this giant water Atronach thing, and it gets even worse from here. Zoran is literally just a slightly larger guy. The spectacle is supposed to be the knot run, but the knot run gets so annoying so quickly that it just loses anything that's cool about it, and then you're just left with a normal dude. I'm not even really going to talk about the final from OC, as he's just Dreadseller boss, but blue. As for the dungeons though, they have the same problem. Past dungeons don't really have this awesome looking final boss that just does cool things. It's something I've been wanting to work on for a little bit. I actually have a video about, is the spectacle in ESO gone? I may still make it, but we are going in the right direction right now, and it's looking a lot better. The major catalyst for this thought though is from VOC. OC, the second boss feels more like a final boss than the final, which just adds this weird thing where like the pacing of OC just makes no sense, as you go from this awesome dragon fight with two big dudes in it that are doing a bunch of stuff, and then you just go to, you know, Kazapan or Dreadseller boss. You know, it doesn't make much sense. The final boss in Naj Kalish kind of fixes that for me, as it feels like the finale to a dungeon. It feels like this is where it all leads to, and it's really cool that we've finally gotten back to that. Anyway, now it's time to actually talk about the final boss instead of just ranting about something that I just don't even think anyone actually cares about. This lizard is probably the scariest thing ever made, but it's also probably the easiest to deal with. It's really weird how they made something that can be this aggro and just not really do anything. Okay, in my script notes, I have the lizard being the first thing I talk about, but that just makes no sense from the boss fight perspective, as you do the main boss first. So we're just going to ignore everything going on here and skip halfway through this thinking script and talk about the main boss first. The actual main boss itself doesn't do all that much. However, everything he does do hits extremely hard, as our good friend Cal has learned the hard way many times. This boss doesn't move around a lot, he doesn't attack very quickly, he does troll though. It's interesting, he has a heavy attack where he swings. However, this swing does basically no damage. And then he summons a clone of himself a second later that then swings and does the heavy attack damage, which is, I honestly find funny. The fact that he will swing, make you drop your block, and you just get killed from a thing that pops up behind you is hilarious to me. But past all that, he's just an interesting dude. He does a bunch of stuff, he spawns a lot of ads, but the real focus for me in this fight comes down to the lizard. The lizard during the fight with the main boss isn't doing anything. He is just rolling around the arena, making the arena smaller, and every so often spitting at a DPS or trying to punch the tank in the face. None of this actually does much, but it's just funny when he stops and tries to punch the crap out of a tank, and it's, you know, funny sometimes is what I'll take over anything being difficult. However, when the boss hits a certain threshold, the lizard will trigger something in itself and get very mad and start trying to squish the tank. Whether or not he's good at this is different for everyone. For our group, he didn't hit hard enough to ever really become threatening. However, he does trigger this thing where it's like, you are just 1v1ing this lizard. And it's kind of cool. He doesn't really care about anyone else until he does. He does some fake outs where it looks like he's targeting the tank, but instead of targeting the tank, he hits the rest of the group with AoEs, and it's just interesting and cool mechanics. The last thing I want to talk about with this fight is the fact that the lizard has an immunity phase. We all hate immunity phases, however, again, this is an immunity phase done well. The lizard will go immune and the final boss will jump back into the arena, and guess what? You have to fight both of them, and there's this giant lizard just trying to beat the crap out of the tank while the tank is trying to hold the boss as still as possible. It's never really impossible. It can feel very hectic, and it can be sometimes unfairly hard to the tank just due to the situation, but we never got to the point where it felt impossible. This creates a cool dynamic where the tank can feel like it's getting unfairly hard at points, and it lasts for long enough to where you have to start thinking about it, but not long enough to where you're like, this is actually impossible. You can get to these points where the boss is going to force the tank to stand somewhere, but the lizard will not let you go there. And there's cool ways to figure out and like get to the spot you want to. There are some instances where the lizard will push the tank out of where he needs to stand, and if it just happens at the wrong time, that can lead to someone dying, which I think is the most unfair this fight ever gets. However, you can counter this in multiple different ways. But no, overall, this fight is just super fun. I really enjoy this fight. I enjoy that they brought back this feeling of, it's not even necessarily hard, it's just, it feels hard. There's a lot going on. It's a lot of stuff just happening, and it just looks cool while doing it. Overall, I'm super happy with the dungeons, and I actually wonder, what do you guys think about them? Do you like the dungeons? Have you gotten to try them yet? If so, did you think they're too hard, good difficulty, or what? I hope the dungeon team can maybe do some work with the raids, with the whole spectacle thing, and just the kind of the awkward nature of where they're at now. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.